The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical psychology for today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, narrated by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. On this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from Special Problems in the Study of Sufi Ideas by Idries Shah. Limitations of contemporary approaches to Sufism. A large part of this problem is the powerful tendency in the present day to place all people, things, ideas into specialist categories. Categories may be all very well, and who could do without them? But when any matter is being studied and there is only a limited choice of label offered, the experience can seem like being told by Henry Ford that you can have any color automobile providing it is black. This problem, which the inquirer is possibly even unaware of, his preoccupation with a few categories, is matched by that of the Sufi in attempting to convey his own ideas under other than ideal conditions. Here is an illustrative example chosen from recent experience. I give it because it will incidentally, and not in a forced system, tell us something about Sufi ideas. In a recent book, I mentioned, among much else, that Sufi ideas and even literal texts were borrowed by or lay behind theories, organization, and teachings of such diverse aspect as those of chivalry, of St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, Roger Bacon, Geber, the founder of Western alchemy, surnamed the Sufi, Raymond Lully, the Majorcan, Guru Nanak, the founder of Sikhism, and the Gesta Romanorum, as well as Hindu Vedantist teachings. Certain deteriorated psychological procedures, too, have passed into the Western literature of magic and occultism, as well as legitimate psychological ideas and processes, sometimes thought of as recent discoveries. For example, Freud's psychological symbolism interpretation method is used in Sufi Ghazali's Niche, 900 years before Freud. This book created, among reviewers and others, a quite remarkable and manifold reaction. Certain reviewers and others, ignorant of the fact that Sufi books seldom have indices, so that the reader will have to read the book in its entirety, have deplored the lack of an index to the Sufis. Some were enthralled, not always for good reasons, but it is the others of whom I am speaking. What I had done was to collect the results of whole lifetimes of other people's academic research, often buried in monographs and seldom read books, always by highly respected Orientalists and specialists of one kind or another. I also included live material from Sufic sources. But although the quoted material was by no means a complete selection from the teachings available, it was too rich a mixture for some readers. And yet many of them should have been far more familiar than I was with work already done in their own fields. One celebrated expert had uncomplimentary things to say about me, to say nothing of those who attacked what they only thought they found in my work. Shortly after this phase, in conversation with a certain specialist, I mentioned that not only had I been relying in my thesis upon such authorities as Professors Assim, Landau, Ribera, Tara Chand, Guillaume, and others of equally unimpeachable integrity, but that I had in my own text freely quoted their names and works, and that in other cases I had quoted the books by such ancients as Lully, Bacon, Geber, and others who mentioned the Sufis by name, Sufi books, or Sufism specifically. His reaction was not to agree that the experts should have known their job better, but to repeat the name of my main critic. Settling back in his armchair and chuckling, he said, "You've got him, my boy. Make your choice. Do you just want to discredit him, or do you want his job?" My error, as far as treatment of the subject was concerned, had simply been that instead of quoting authority and building up, step by step, an unassailable case, I had assumed that the book would be read thoroughly and that the facts would speak for themselves. My friend in the armchair automatically assumed that I was engaged in a game of displacement of someone in authority. The original critic had propelled himself into the attack on an equally false assumption, that I lacked good material because I had not hammered it home triumphantly enough. What is perhaps more astonishing when we look at problems in the study of Sufi ideas is the treatment given to them by people who, if not experts in the field itself, might have familiarized themselves with the academic resources available. Hence, to take an instance of a not uncommon trend in the West, we find a professor writing a book on philosophers of the East in which, out of nearly 100,000 words, only about 300, one page out of over 300, are concerned with the Sufis. And this in spite of the fact that the same author had published a work on the philosophers of the West, both types of thinker having been influenced by Sufi sources. This influence is never mentioned. The redoubtable English philosopher Bertrand Russell, too, is found to have written a huge book, Wisdom of the West, in which Western thinkers whose connection with Sufi thought is clear are named, but where no mention of Sufis or Sufism may be found. It may be said that both of these books are popularizations intended for the general reader, but they do, after all, carry the name of scholastics, and they do lack information. General readers, or members of the non-Orientalist disciplines consulting these books, would have little means of knowing what had been left out. Quite revealing among the problems facing anyone who wants to study Sufi ideas is the constant repetition of unproved theories, represented as facts, by specialists and others who themselves have little objectivity. Since Sufic study is carried out mainly by direct methods, and it has been known to be conveyed entirely by gesture, symbol, and demonstration, when we lose this element in our study, relying upon books, we must be at the mercy of those who advance all kinds of subjective theories. For example, some experts' opinions about the origins of Sufism. The influence of Christian mysticism is paramount. A reaction from the burdens of a dry monotheism, of a rigid law and a stiffened ritual. Having its origins in the religious conceptions of India and Greece. Appear to be a kind of Gnostics. The emotional character of Sufism, so different from the cold and bloodless theories of the Indian philosophies, is apparent. A little Persian sect. A great perversion of Muhammad's teaching. Derived in part from Plato, the Attic Moses, but mainly from Christianity. Orientalists have indeed attributed the origins of Sufism to Persian, Hindu, Neoplatonic or Christian sources, but these diverse attributions have ended by cancelling one another. There are those who say that Sufism is developed from historical Islam, and they include some Sufi apologists writing in this vein for good reasons. Some say that it is the reverse, a reaction against Islamic attitudes. There are those who would believe that its ideas stem from Christianity as they know it, or that they are partially or wholly attributable to the effect of Persian dualism, or from China, or India, or again non-Indian. There are champions of the Neoplatonic theory of shamanism, and we could extend this list. The picture starts to look like one of people debating whether iron comes from Sweden or Japan. We may call Sufi ideas a psychology, not because this term adequately describes Sufism, but because nowadays wisdom is not a popular word. It is to be noted, however, that because the dictionary makers do not understand us, the possibility of Sufi ideas being understood is not thereby excluded. In the problem of permissible categories of study, we see that Sufism straddles many of them. We can find materials bodily taken from Sufism, ideas which are characteristic of it, methods, tales, legends, and even poetry of the Sufis in the phenomenon of the troubadours, in the William Tell legend of Switzerland, in the Near Eastern cult of the peacock angel, in Gurdjieff and Ouspensky and Maurice Nicoll, the Swede Dag Hammarskjöld, Shakespeare, in the psychology of Kenneth Walker, in the tales of the Dane Hans Christian Andersen, in the works by Sir Richard Burton, himself a Qadiri dervish, in a recently issued series of textbooks on learning English from the Oxford University Press, in contemporary children's books, in the religion of the witches, in the symbology of the Rosicrucians, of the Illuminati, in many medieval scholastics of the West, in the Bhakti cult of the Hindus, though this is much popularized in the West as a traditional Hindu system, in the secret books of the Ishmaelis, in the organization, name, and techniques of some of the so-called assassins, in tales and techniques of supposedly Japanese Zen origin, or reputedly connected with yoga, in material relating to the Knights Templar, in psychotherapeutic literature, in Chaucer and Dante Alighieri, and I am only enumerating the sources almost at random. Narrator's note. Notes for each of these can be found in the full text of this book. This audio is made available by the Idries Shah Foundation and is copyright 2019. All rights reserved.